Halloween doesn't always come early, but today we've received an absolute treat. No trick. Tyler Averett, a gentleman, a scholar, a man that shook the PPM, and a great leader. The new, well, he's been here a while, but he's newly titled the Chief Operating Officer of BRD Pest Solutions. Feel blessed to have him. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, Doss.
So Ty's roots actually go back way deeper too in this game than just operating and being a branch manager. Ty also has sold and had a long tenure of sales. Sold briefly to some funeral plans.
I did.
He's probably put your family in the grave, if you know what I mean. And we feel really glad to kind of dive into all that, both your sides of operations and kind of how to like prep accounts and make sure that they're good for like for the long haul. You get them on your back end and they're solid, but also to just learn some of your sales tips and tricks from like past summers. So Ty, really quick, where are you from?
I'm from Salem, Utah.
Ty, I remember when I first met him, he was in my kindergarten class. That's when I became friends with him. I learned though that we weren't friends till later when he was 14 and when I met him again at Salem. And that was a beautiful time.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider our first meeting, we were acquaintances, We didn't actually grow that brotherly bond until later. So Dude. I think we were sophomores when we were actually good buddies.
Yeah, I've never wanted to walk off my own podcast more.
Right, but look at us now. Look how far we've come. It's not how you start, it's how you finish.
100%. Okay, cool. And so, Ty, some of your interests, big baseball guy?
Yeah, baseball guy, football guy, any sport. Love sports. Golf actually is probably the one now, but
it's awesome.
Still struggling with that one.
Are you dating anybody?
Yep.
Love it.
Shout out Sloan James.
Hey, let's go. Shout out Sloan. Awesome. We're kind of bringing this back in or starting kind of getting into the meat of stuff. So walk us back to like your first experience in like pest control, door to door. And like we went out, we were marketing for Romney Pest Control. But I guess what was like some of the things you kind of like learned right away going out and selling?
Yeah. For me, I mean, sales, you had told me, I remember a phone call I had with you when you were doing your summer pre-mission and pre-my mission, and you said, Ty, promise me you'll come knock at least one summer with me. And at the time I said, yeah, and I just was doing that just to be your friend, but I really had no intentions of ever selling. But then a couple years went by, and I saw you having a good time out there, and it seemed like a good opportunity. And so going out for me was kind of like a last resort thing, which now being on the other end of it with the opportunity to work with like my little brother and his friends that are coming through, I encourage them to not do as much of what I did and do it as treat it much less of a last resort and more so as a great opportunity to get ahead of things. You're 20 years old. Most of your time you're not tied down to a girlfriend or a wife or a family. Most of the time you don't know what you're doing in school. So, why not go out and make a good earning and then, see what you can do from there. So that was awesome for me. Even though I did treat it as a last resort, I was still able to have that same experience.
Well, and when you went out, you took full advantage of it. We filmed Spencer's podcast not too long ago, and he was kind of telling us like what it was like that first day, kind of going out and knocking and stuff like that. And I guess for you, like a lot of times people are like scared of the opportunity but then when they get out there, they're also like, whoa, like this is tough, or this is harder than I thought it was going to be. Did that happen to you? And if so, like what kind of got you through it? And what would you recommend to other people kind of coming through, how they can kind of deal with that like stress of like being out there and not feeling so sure like right when they get out?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, for me, the 20 plus hour drive out to Houston the first summer was daunting in itself. That I'm like, I'm really packing my bags, I'm a summer guy, a baseball guy through and through. Like I love the summer. So I knew I was sacrificing a summer, driving 20 hours. I remember listening to Door to Door Millionaire like the entire way there. And that was almost the extent of my prep that year, or that summer. And I remember getting out there on the first day. I shadowed you. We were on our little Razor scooters. And I still remember the first sale. The guy, you switched him over from probably Terminex or one of the big companies. And we got off the porch. I was like, oh, that seemed easy. And you're like, Ty, that was like a 30-minute switchover. Like that guy had been with the company for like 5 years. Like that was no joke. And I was like, oh wow. And so after that, then you turn me loose. And like it seems like every guy on his first day always gets like a lucky lay down. And so I got one on my own that afternoon.
That first year, like, rep luck is crazy. I swear, like, everyone, no matter how dedicated they are, you let them loose that first day by themselves and they'll get something.
Yeah, and that's exactly. I forgot to get like their security code on their card, and I called you and I was like, Doss, I forgot. I had to go back. And I went back to their house and they still gave me their card information. Like I was so clueless and they still bought. That's how easy that sale was. So I had that initial experience, but then my next few days were super tough. And I remember it was probably the next Monday. I'd probably been knocking for 4 or 5 days, and it had been pretty slow, like a 1, 0, 2, 0, 1 kind of pattern. And me and Spence, who you had on, we're talking like, hey, if we can't figure this out, like we could still go home and we could figure out what other options are there for us. Like we're successful. We're confident guys. We'll find a new job. But then, at lunch we sat there like, no, we drove all the way out here. Like let's buckle in and let's get this done. And we went out and we both had a successful evening. And then from there, we never looked back. So what I learned from that is that like sales is not just something you're going to dive in and be great at right away. It really does take a lot of practice, and you have to sharpen that sword before you get comfortable, knocking on a door and pitching someone pest control. So it just takes longer than what you might expect.
And preseason training, like obviously back then we had like very, very basic like material and or stuff like that. If you could like go back now and be like, hey, like have all the same like materials and stuff and trainings and time, do you feel like, what do you think that could have done for your summers? Do you think like that would have increased by 100 accounts, 150? Like, do you think that, where would that have taken you?
Oh, totally. I mean, I imagine at least, 100 plus, maybe even double both of my summers, just with the whole. Neither summer I put in a lot of preseason prep, because even my second summer, I had kind of thought I was going to go do something else, and I still ended up coming back. But if, like we hold trainings every Wednesday with some of our best guys, teaching the young fellas the ropes, tips and tricks that turn them into being super successful. If I would have gone to things like that, if I would have dove into some sales psychology books, there's tons of videos that you can find online. If I would have done any of that, I imagine it would have been a lot more profitable for me. But so that's what I would do different, is I would absolutely spend, a couple months preparing. I mean, it's only January now. I'd spend a couple months prepping, make sure that I'm a little bit sharper come the first door.
And so, and you had monster days before. Like obviously, we went out in the trenches together and sold. There were moments though in those beginning summers when I remember you would get to a certain point and you're like, that's about like where I'd want to be, and then like you would either through conversations you had with people or like different incentives or stuff, you would change your mindset and like push higher. What's some things that you're like, let me phrase it like this. How do you think a guy can go from like, a lot of times people accept the reality of like, I sell 2 accounts a day, or I sell 5 accounts a day, or I sell 6 or whatever. How do you get away from like focusing on like that and just being like, hey, I'm gonna go out and do the best that I can? Like, what were some things for you that kind of like shook that up to where you're like, I'm not just gonna do what I've done day over day over day? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I remember, what it sounds like almost what you're referring to is my first summer. I was in this, after I got rolling, I got in this habit of thinking like, if I get 3-4 a day, like it's fine. It's good. It's just a good day. Felt like that was enough earning. Like I didn't need to stress like pushing myself anywhere beyond that. And I remember you offering me like a shoe incentive, and you're like, hey, if you get 5 today, like I'll hook you up with a pair of shoes, right? And that day I went out and got 5, So it was almost that simple, where I was like, I don't need to put a cap on myself, just because it's what I feel like is enough, right? And so, beyond, and so I think stretching yourself is really, you got to realize that no matter what you're currently doing, there's always another gear, like there's another level. And so for me, 3 a day was just me like feeling very complacent and feeling like, that's enough. But I was missing the bigger picture, that there was a lot more to get if I would just, push myself a little bit harder. So I think that's really what it comes down to is, you might be working really hard, but I do think there's another gear that you can get to add a couple extra sales a day, which, if you multiply that over the course of the summer, it's going to be a much bigger year than just that, if you're shooting for a 3, right?
Right. So every summer we went out, you were really good at making sure your cancels were low. They were always in a really, really healthy range. And you've now operated a branch for a year. You are like helping oversee all operations across the board. What's some things you've seen that you're like, hey, I'd focus on this to make sure your back end numbers are what they need to be, how to put on quality accounts where both the customer is taken care of and the rep? What are some things that you're like, oh, I think it'd be really helpful if I knew that my first year or my second year or stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of it comes down to, where you're selling. Like, make sure you're putting yourself in a winning situation where you're not just, suckering, not very wealthy people into a quick deal, dropping your initial super low just to get, the single mom in the ghetto to sign up for pest control. Those ones, those typically don't make it, come January. And, power to you, to put some numbers on the board. But I think those you want to avoid as much as you can. So, find yourself in a good situation. If your team lead, kind of cut you some area where maybe you have too much of that going on, maybe call them up. Say, hey, like, get me a better neighborhood. Like, I don't want this to look bad on the back end. So I think knocking in a good area. And then in terms of, working with a customer, sales is a lot about confidence, believing in what you're doing, exuding that, and your customer is going to feel that. And so people or reps will feel when they're going through the agreement or when they're explaining that you got to hop on board with us for 12 months, they'll kind of shy away from like expressing those details that it is a service agreement and that they are obligated to take the services, and they'll just skip as much as they can and almost like sign the agreement for them. But if you're just confident and you say, oh yeah, like a lot of companies, they're doing this for 2 years, we're only going to ask you to stick with us for 12 months. Then after that, you can, do whatever you will. Mm-hmm. But I think just being confident throughout the process and, not ending that at the agreement will, people will understand, okay, I'm hopping on board for a year, like, and then after that I can make a decision. But the reps that are more honest and, share those details, I think do a little bit better on that.
100%. And you see it like with obviously like cancel rates and stuff like that, like knowing the paperwork and being able to explain it well, I don't think it loses you anything. Like,
yeah.
I think a lot of times reps are like, oh, like if I just kind of like scroll the bottom and hope they sign it, they'll be fine. But kind of just like, you don't realize it, but that like 2 minutes that you are out there explaining it, I feel like you're preventing so many future like negative conversations that can come up. And that's just nice because at the end of the day, you want to be out there helping the person. And if you're not doing a good job of that, it's going to be really, really tough on you, on the company, and the customer.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember in our agreement, it talks about like the egg cycle, right? And how we come every 90 days to stay on top of the egg cycle. And my first summer, I was so afraid to like get too into the weeds, and because you don't want to like spend too much time on things that don't matter. But my second year, I would always be like, oh yeah, and the reason we come quarterly because we don't want to stay on top of this egg cycle for you, because these are going to leave little eggs behind. We want to come back and stay on top of them. People would like eat up the egg cycle. They'd be like, oh yeah, oh that makes sense. I get why you guys are coming back. Instead of us like surprising them every time we came back, and then them thinking they only needed a one-time service. So almost like just confidently explaining, why we're coming once a quarter or bi-monthly always, I think, saves you more in the back end than it does hurt you on the front end.
Right. And with your pitch, there's things obviously at the beginning that you did that you probably weren't doing by the end. What's some things that you're like, over the years, I've cleaned this up, or I figured out, oh, I don't want to do this anymore for my pitch because this, and maybe not even like a retention perspective, but just overall, like what are some things from like, oh, like my pitch, I've omitted these things and I thought they were necessary in the beginning, and I started adding these things in the end because I had more success.
Yeah. A lot of that came down to me like from first year to second year, and then also like training a couple reps last year with I felt like pricing, I often would always resort to like quickly just like lowering some price for them and try to get, make them feel like they're getting a better financial deal. And then later on, I realized that if you could just build more value, as you're explaining service or as you're trying to switch over from a competing company and get them to join with us, I found that just building more value with service was a lot more beneficial than just being like, oh, well, we'll do your first one for dirt cheap, Yes. It was just, I found my pitch felt more effective, and I wasn't just suckering them into a deal. It was more so they're like, oh, this guy is offering a higher quality service, and that's why I want to do this, not because it's $20 cheaper.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest thing for me that I changed from being a rookie and just offering as cheap as I could get it, and to being, a veteran and, helping them see that it's a quality service.
Yeah. Warren Buffett has a saying where he says, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Yeah. And I think the more you can focus on value, the funny thing about value is it is value. Like what you get like is what you're gonna get, and price is more arbitrary. You can move it, you can make it fluctuate, and as long as you're really good at pointing out value, people will pay for stuff.
Right.
Cool. And so we've obviously had a bunch of like crazy stories, crazy reps, funny things that have happened. Do you have one that you're like, oh, love for all of BRD Nation to hear this one? This was funny, or this was a good time from any of the summers?
That's a good question. Yeah, I feel like there's so many, but one that came to mind as you were saying that, and I should have thought of some of these before, but I had a buddy selling his name's McLean. Yes, you know McLean very well.
Hey, just really quick, Spencer's funny story was with McLean too.
Oh, it was? It's not the dog one, is it?
No, I love this one though.
Okay,
yeah.
I was like, I don't want to tell the same story, but and this one honestly kind of almost makes me look kind of like a jerk. But when I look back, I just laugh every time I think about it. But McLean, I think me and McLean that day had driven out to area together, and I dropped him off, and then I went over to mine. And the next day, I was going to New York for my little brother's baseball trip, so I was flying out to New York. And I was kind of like, I hadn't packed anything, and it was a super early flight, so I was a little bit stressed. And also I had kind of a slow day. Like I might have had, I don't know, 2, 3, I don't know. It was a slower day. I don't remember what the number was. And McLean had like 5 or 6. And so I'm like, you know, if you're the lower selling guy of your car, you're always kind of like, oh, man, I got to pick this guy up. He's going to be like on cloud 9. So I'm already in that mindset. I go to pick up McLean, and he's like pitching, or he's closing a deal on the door while as I pull up, and I was like, this guy's killing it, you know, like good for him, but also like, man, I had a crappy day. So Clayton comes walking down to my car, and he's like, Ty, before I get in, these guys, like, this deal's a done deal, but this dog, there's like this dog following him. He's like, we have to take this dog back to his owner. And this is the mangiest looking dog I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's gross, its hair's all matted. And I'm just like, I don't really want, you know, like, I'm not picking this dog up. And he's like, yeah, let's just throw it in your back of your car and we'll take it home. Like, I have to close this deal. I was like, Clayton, don't you dare put that dog in my car. You know, I was like, I'm not taking this dog home. And I like dogs. I'm a dog guy. But this dog was so gross. I'm already in a bad mood. I'm stressed about getting home. And then finally he's like, I can't even remember what he says to me, but he's like pissed off. He's like, fine. Like, I'll just walk home. So Clayton ends up like taking the dog back to the guy. And then I go pick him up, and then he gets in the car, and we're kind of just like almost yelling at each other. He says a few things to me, you know, a couple profanities we won't say on the podcast. But it was just like, to this day, I just still die that McLean, you know, was just trying to throw a dog in the back of my car. And I was so unwilling to take this dog. I probably should have just taken the dog, but.
Well, what I love too is like the neighborhood knew about the dog. Like, it was a neighborhood dog that like, they'd seen multiple times. And so like the dog was probably going to find its way home.
The dog was going to find his way home. I was like, Clayton, this is a dog, you know, like they do this. This is what they do. They'll find his home, you know, but he was dead set. I mean, and he wanted the deal, you know, I get it.
Well, I love too that was a contingency from the customer. Like, who brought that up? Like, I can't imagine the customer was like, hey, on top of like waiving the service fee, go ahead and take the dog back.
Take my dog home. Yeah, take the dog home. I imagine it was more of him, you know, trying to establish some goodwill in the neighborhood as he's had a big day. But yeah, that's one I always think of as funny. There's a ton. Those are both of our summers were a blast out there.
So Ty, you're a big health guy, right? You've battled like IBS for a long time.
I'm a survivor.
And what are things that like you learned over the summer to be like how to keep your health good so that you could perform well when you're out in the doors? I think a lot of times when kids go out and it's their first summer, some people have never lived away from home before. Some people haven't had like a lot of their luxuries are provided for them through like being close to family and friends and stuff like that. What are some things you did to make sure that like your body was good and able to eat, like kind of like perform well throughout the summer?
Yeah, for me, I think a routine is just probably the most important thing you can do. And I hear a lot of stories from other reps, and I've seen it from reps on our team of guys that, and I'm not saying these are bad, but like some guys almost would, you know, you knock your full day on the doors, you come home, you know, you eat, whatever, but then you'll have guys that stay out way too late playing video games or you know, whatever it is. And again, I don't discourage that, but our first summer, my routine was, you know, I'd go out. I think our knocking schedule is a little different than it is now, but we'd, you know, morning meeting at 9, we'd go knock the morning, we'd come back for lunch at about 3, and then knock 4 to 9. And then I'd stop on the way home, grab some food, I'd usually pack a lunch. So I ate like a pretty healthy lunch if I could. I'd like go shopping on Saturday nights, pick up some food, make a lunch. And then at night I would eat it. I love Raising Cane's. So a lot of times it was Cane's. And then I would almost, take a shower, unwind with like a TV show. And that first summer it was Chuck. If you've seen Chuck. And it's just a funny show on, I don't even remember what it's on, but so then I would be to sleep every night by probably midnight and then wake up every morning at 8. And a lot of times I'd read my scriptures for like the 30 minutes or so, eat some breakfast, go to morning meeting. And so just like having a consistent routine, I never felt like super worn out. And so by the time I'd get to the doors, like I was pretty awake. I got 8 hours of sleep every single night, and I was eating good, and I was well rested, and I was sharp. And I think to be on the doors and being in front of a person all day, you have to be sharp. Otherwise, they're going to sense your weariness or your lack of confidence, and you're going to miss on people that you normally wouldn't.
Right. 100%. And I guess also too, like kind of going back to like your experience in like operations and like managing both being a sales rep and then also like overseeing everyone that's like performing the service. Where are some disconnects that you see a lot of sales reps make that could probably make like the service team be able to service their accounts a lot better and a lot easier? Like that you would throw out there being like, hey, I'd avoid this pitfall that you see reps fall into year after year after year.
Yeah. That's a fun tango, having the, working on the service side and also, working with the reps, because the reps like there's a reason door-to-door reps get paid so well, because it is an incredibly difficult job. Right. But then also the service pros, they get a little frustrated because a lot of times, they don't get paid quite as well, and they're there to kind of clean up the dirty work that the reps set up for them. And so what I've seen, like things that frustrate the service pros that the sales reps could maybe do a little bit differently. Honestly, a lot of it comes back to, like if you overpromise a little too much, then you're going to get your service pro in some trouble. These are guys that like, they want to go out and they want to do a good job. And a lot of times they really do want to take care of the reps. There's guys on our team now that like take a lot of pride in especially servicing initial accounts because they want to develop a good relationship with the sales rep. But if you're a sales rep and your whole pitch, you find yourself kind of like stretching one, you're like, okay, to get this deal, I know I need to stretch this a little bit more. Like a lot of times a technician, they can make up for that. But if you're doing that consistently, that's what often will get the techs into trouble, because they'll show up and the expectations that the customer has are just like so far above and beyond what the scope of the service actually is that it causes some problems. And we never we don't want to ever discourage a sales rep from, doing what he needs to do to get a sale. But also if you can keep in mind that like your technician, he's the guy out there fighting on the back end to make it happen. If you put him in a bad spot, it's a lose-lose for both sides.
100%. And I think one of the ways that you can really avoid a lot of those pitfalls is like a lot of times guys like to throw out like crazy promises of what like the tech's gonna go do like in the yard. Yeah. And instead of like being like, hey, we'll come out and blanket spread the entire yard, one of the things I love to be like is, hey, we'll come out, we'll blanket spread the immediate yard around the home. Yeah. I think a lot of people make this mistake of going like, hey, we're going 30, 40, 50 feet out, because what I love about anyone is you give them any line in the sand and they're going to expect you to do whatever it is. It's never far enough. Yeah. And so I think just seeing things like we're going to get the immediate yard while we can get up in the upper story eaves, and just kind of keeping things like a little bit more general, but also with the like relative understanding that it's not going to be something crazy far up and beyond, is a good tactic to, it's a good thing to just set expectations also in your personal life and stuff like that too. If you're always the guy that overpromises, always is like, oh, it's going to be like magical fairy, like that's not grounded in reality. We all kind of know that. And so I just think there is a really, really good way of painting the service in a way that's really positive, that that the customer likes, but just finding that sweet spot is really, really important. I think if you reach out to managers, myself, you can find a really, really easy way to do both of those. Totally.
Yeah. If you can, like you're saying, keeping a little more general versus, nailing down the specifics, people are almost going to like, the interaction you'll have with the customer is so brief that they'll misremember things all the time. And so a lot of times, I don't even think it's the sales rep's fault. It's the customer's like, no, he told me that they would get this, and that. And the sales rep probably didn't say all that, but the customer wants to remember what they want to remember. Right. And so keeping things pretty simple, yeah, we'll definitely set you up for more success.
Yeah. Well, we just want to thank you, Ty, for the phenomenal service team you're putting out there. And I know you guys take great care of all of the customers and making sure. I mean, Steven's great with like retention and getting on those reps. So we appreciate you big for that. So thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Um, kind of walk us through too along this whole like roller coaster. You've worn a number of different hats. What's some things that you're like, oh, personally, I learned a lot, like doing X, or this is something I've picked up along the way that's just been beneficial from this experience.
Yeah. I mean, from sales as a whole, I found, my early days, like I didn't know in school, I didn't know where my path was. I didn't know like what career I wanted. When I first came off my mission, I thought I was going to be like my dad. I thought I was going to do physical therapy. Turns out I get super queasy around needles and anything medical, so that was not in the cards. But then, getting the opportunity to go sell, I realized like, hey, maybe I'm a business guy, And then in turn, I was like, okay, I'm a pretty decent salesman. Like maybe I'm a sales business guy. And after my second summer and then my junior year of college, I got recruited by the company you mentioned before, where I was selling like funeral plans. It's a marketing company that partners with funeral homes. And honestly, like they wanted me just because I had like this door-to-door sales experience. They're like, oh, this guy, he can talk to people. He's personable. He has good communication ability. Like he may know not a single thing about funeral homes, but like we can mold him into what we need him to be. And
really a quick plug on that. I didn't even know what the service looked like till like my halfway through my second summer. I'd like never seen one done.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's just like, it's the skills, it's the communication abilities you generate from just having those experiences. It's like, they almost don't care. And I even had an interview for, it was at Whirlpool when I was a junior, same time, like looking for internships. And I had forgotten about the interview. I woke up at 8 a.m. and realized it was in 30 minutes. I threw on a little tie, and it was over Zoom, so I didn't have to put pants on. And then they're like, "Oh, can you pitch us on your specified product?" And I didn't even know I was supposed to sell them a product. So I pulled up some old PowerPoint from one of my classes, pitched them a random product, and I even got the internship. So just like for me, like sales itself just gives you like such an ability, almost not to wing it, but you just learn so much about how people work, and you can communicate on a level where if you don't have like those day-to-day, like those door knocking experiences, you kind of miss out on that. Like you really learn how to read people. And I think it helps you in your career, in your day-to-day life. I can't say for sure in relationships yet, but I like to think it does. Maybe with your friends and family, I know that it does. But yeah, I just think sales as a whole, if like you're a young fella or a young gal, like considering it, I think you absolutely should try it at least once just to develop those abilities. And then you can go do whatever you want. Like the girl that I worked with a lot last year, she's a teacher. And then she went out and had an awesome summer and I think she would say she learned a ton from it too.
That's cool. And taking money away from it. So like a lot of times when people talk about like recruiting or sales or stuff like that, like what would you say are some just like intangibles that you've like learned along the way, like maybe in recruiting and then also in sales? Like what's something you're like, oh, it's been really cool to just be a part of this job and bring people on because like I've helped people grow, or like stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, money aside, which I think is what really drives the door-to-door desire with all these the young people around here. Money aside, like working with people and in like my capacity now, it's been fun to work with the customer service team, to work with the sales team as well, and also work with the service technician team. Like these are a lot of people that are kind of like, maybe this isn't their ultimate landing spot, but it's somewhere where they can jump in right now and they can be lifted, and they can also lift around them. And so I've really enjoyed, working in a capacity with people where I can influence them and kind of push them and drive them to do a little bit better. I'm a sports guy. We've talked about this like 3 or 4 times already. And so I'm really big on motivation and, setting goals and pushing yourself. And so it's been fun to, see how that incorporates into a business world, helping people set goals, helping them level up their potential. And that's what's working inside BRD has given me a lot more of that opportunity.
Love it. Well, okay, I'm going to give you a compliment real quick. I think you're an amazing listener. Like you do a really good job of like hearing people out. And do you feel like that got better over sales? Do you feel like you were always pretty good at that? And like, how important would you say listening is to being a successful sales rep?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm an amazing listener, but thank you. I do think it's crucial. You know, when you're on the doors, and especially early on, I remember feeling like I was so eager to get my pitch out, and I was so like, I need to check A, B, and C, and D, and then I need to close here. I was very almost robotic, and I found as I was on the doorstep and I listened to people, and I even, probably developed this even more when I was working, doing my funeral pre-planning, that people, if you can just, listen to them, hear them out, and then pitch to their need, then it's just much more effective and you're a lot more successful. And so rather than, being a fire hose of just information about bugs, listen to what Joey's, what he's dealing with, what his problems are, and then tailor your pitch to what he needs. And so if I am a good listener, it probably is from sales and, those experiences of me just trying to discern what's going on and then trying to prescribe the right medication, for the person's need there.
And a big takeaway I think anyone listening can take away from that is like after you've what you're pitching, a lot of times the first 2 weeks, you kind of like figure it out. Okay, this is what we do. I think that next step is like, okay, now how can I read every situation, read this person for what they're like wanting. And I think like the best sales reps I've ever seen are phenomenal listeners. And so yeah, over and over again, I think if you can just tune into what they want and then hit on it really hard, you'll sell more than just saying some crazy one-liner that gets everyone to drop down and just do it. So
yeah, I do think I do think there's value, and you got to know like the skeleton of the pitch and of the service. You gotta, and then you kind of build the meat and the fat around that with listening to them and using your own little personality from here and there. I do think that helps out too.
So outside of the content, like maybe here at BRD, what's some things that maybe you've like, movie you've watched, book you've read, podcast you've listened to? What's something you're like, hey, this was really, really positive that impacted my sales career that I think could help anyone if they tuned into it?
Yeah. That's a good question. Movies I've read, no, movies I've watched, don't really, podcasts I've listened to. Specifically, I remember, and I actually can't remember the name of this podcast, but it was your boy Sam Taggart, and I listened to this a lot my second summer, and it might have just been like door-to-door pros, door-to-door podcasts. I wish I could remember, but he would interview just like successful rep after successful rep every single week, and it was like, oh, this guy did a golden door in this industry, this guy did a golden door in this industry, this guy like started his own team here and did this, and so what I found was, listening to that podcast and hearing, just the success stories and like the daily habits of these studs, there were things that I could incorporate into my daily routine and into my mindset that were super helpful for me. So I wish I could remember the name of that specific podcast, but I remember that being like extremely beneficial for me, just hearing from the pros, guys that did this at a high level, and then, carrying that into my work and then also even my days after a door-to-door rep.
I love it. That's a great tip. Really quick, I'm going to give you a couple rapid fire questions and then we're going to wrap up. But just kind of make a little speed round.
Okay.
So I'll give you the question. You answer it in 1 to 2 words or whatever, or a sentence. One of your favorite leaders?
My favorite leaders? Was this a one? I get one of these?
Yeah, get one.
Favorite leaders? We have a polarizing relationship, but my dad. And
I love that answer.
I hope he watches this.
Okay, I love it. Hey, shout out to Darren. Darren's he's a king.
He's a great man.
He's a king. I love Darren.
You're never a prophet in your own house, they say.
Okay. Favorite movie?
Moneyball. Brad Pitt.
That's a classic. Favorite first date?
Favorite first date? The date I've probably been on the most for a first date is Nickel City.
Nickel City.
Done that a million times. I've done it since I was 17, and so the workers there probably recognize me. I've been doing that same one forever. But I think it's a good one. You can see if they're competitive. You can see if they like to have fun, and it's not too expensive, so you don't have to spend too much money on someone else's wife.
Love it. Outside of this room, favorite sales rep you've ever worked with? Because obviously, I don't want.
Yeah, of course. Favorite. Honestly, it's probably a tie between Spence and Daisy. Me and Spence were like brothers both summers. But then there was also stretches with me and Daisy where like he didn't have a car and we'd go out every day and he would almost want to knock. I shouldn't say almost. He would want to knock the same streets. So sometimes he would like knock across the street for me, and so he's just a fun guy like that.
And one thing that I hope that reps catch when they listen to these podcasts, I think having someone out there with you that's like keeping you focused on the right things, that's like cheering you on, is so important. And when you're out there during the summer, if your core starts to get like negative or sad or kind of like not going towards the right things, like find those people in your office that are like a Daisy, that are like a Spence, that are going to take you to like the moon. They're going to help you grow. And I just think that's something that like isn't even really like a skill per se. It's just like putting yourself around the right like group of people will just make you so much better.
Yeah. And high performing guys are they're not gonna turn you away if you want to go gravitate to them. They usually like to talk about how well they're doing, So
and if you are the guy in your office that is the higher performer and top dog, know that you're that person for people. Like if you are like, if you can tell people move because of you or doing a lot of things, be the person that kind of like moves the room forward and makes things happen. So Ty, I learned a lot. Fun hopping on the pod with you. Glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, brother.
Hey, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'll see you, bro.